Have you ever looked in the mirror and felt that the reflection staring back at you wasn't entirely your own? There's a strange silence that lives inside many modern souls. Not the peaceful kind, but the sort of silence that echoes after something sacred has been lost. People walk through crowded cities, attend meetings, smile in photographs and laugh at shallow jokes, all while a quiet void pulses behind their rib cages. A void they've never dared to name. That emptiness isn't about failure or lack of success. It isn't about what you have or haven't achieved. It's something older, more ancient, something that whispers in the spaces between thoughts. The soul, unseen and unheard, mourning its own disconnection. We live in a time of masks, of finely polished personas, of curated identities, of needing to be someone in order to belong somewhere. But in this pursuit, the soul is often left behind. And with it, the most vital part of who we are. The parts we've rejected, repressed, denied. The forgotten voices in the dark. This darkness isn't evil. It's not a flaw. It is the sombra, what Jung called the shadow. It is everything within us that we did not want to be but still are. It is every unspoken pain, every unwanted thought, every instinct we pushed away to survive in a world that only applauds light. And so, beneath the surface, the soul fragments. Parts of us are buried alive, left to rot in the underworld of our own being. But no matter how deep we bury them, they do not die. They wait, they whisper. They manipulate our lives from the shadows until we gather enough courage to face them. Imagine a man who has never cried. His whole life he believed tears were a weakness. But deep inside, beneath the rock-hard surface of his identity, is a boy still weeping from a wound no one ever soothed. And that boy becomes the shadow. He will come out, not through tears, but through anger, coldness, perfectionism, or withdrawal. Or a woman who learned early that being kind meant being silent. Her voice, never heard, never valued, was hidden away. But it didn't vanish. It became a force that lives inside her chest, rising as anxiety, as resentment, as a desire to disappear. Her silence is not peace. It is a scream that no one listens to. The shadow is not against us. It is not the enemy. It is the part of us that carries the truth we were too afraid to feel. It holds the gold, hidden beneath layers of pain. But to reach it, we must descend. We must stop running from ourselves. This is the beginning of the inner alchemy. Alchemy, as Jung saw it, was never just about turning lead into gold. It was a symbolic language for soul transformation. The lead is our raw, unprocessed shadow, the trauma, the rage, the shame, the wounds. And the gold is the essence, the healing, the authenticity that arises when we embrace what we tried to forget. The alchemist within us is not a magician. He is the one who dares to hold what burns, the one who chooses to sit in silence with his demons, to stop blaming the world and instead ask, "What in me have I abandoned?" In the old myths, heroes did not find treasure in the light. They found it in caves guarded by monsters, and so it is with us. The shadow is the cave. And the monster. It is the version of ourselves we most fear to meet. But here's the truth most never hear. When you finally look the monster in the eyes, you realize it is made of your own sorrow, your own longing, your own unmet need to be held. The pain that once terrified you becomes the bridge to your soul. You start to remember who you were before the world told you who to be, before you silenced your own song just to be loved, before you buried your voice, your tears, your fury, your brilliance. And in that remembrance, something alchemical happens. The wound becomes a portal. The darkness becomes fertile. The silence becomes music. The void begins to glow. You're not broken. You were never broken. You were just divided from yourself. And the work now is not to fight the darkness, but to turn toward it with reverence, to listen, to feel, to welcome back every part of you that was once cast aside. This is the sacred art of inner alchemy, turning what was once unbearable into something beautiful, turning fear into strength, turning shame into compassion, turning separation into wholeness. No one can do this for you, no guru, no book, no external power. The path is within, and the first step is to stop running from your shadow. Because it is not there to destroy you. It is there to deliver you back to your soul. There's a strange tension that lives in the human body, an invisible weight that doesn't belong to the muscles or the bones. It's a weight carried in the chest, in the stomach, in the shoulders, that never fully relax. Most people walk through life with this invisible burden, not knowing where it comes from, only that it never leaves. This is the silent rule of modern life. Be who the world wants you to be. Be kind, but not too loud. Be successful, but never too honest about your pain. Smile even when you're dying inside. And slowly, year after year, this performance becomes a prison. What gets locked away in this prison is what Jung called the shadow. Not just rage or shame or fear, but also your spontaneity, your wildness, your raw aliveness. Everything that didn't fit into the carefully constructed image of who you were supposed to be was exiled into the dark. And the shadow does not disappear when ignored. It grows teeth. It becomes the source of every pattern you can't break, every relationship that triggers you, every self-sabotage you swear you'll never repeat. It shows up in projection. The things that irritate you most in others are often the disowned parts of yourself crying out to be seen. The angry man who despises weakness may be rejecting his own vulnerability. The woman who judges others for being selfish may have denied her own right to take up space. The person who seeks perfection in everything may be terrified of being ordinary and of being loved anyway. The shadow plays out not only in our inner world, but in our families, our politics, our cultures. What a society cannot integrate in itself, it will turn into an enemy. The war outside is always a reflection of the war within. But let's pause here. To see your own shadow requires a kind of courage that few possess. Not because the shadow is evil, but because it is painfully honest. It shows you the moments when you betrayed yourself just to be accepted. It brings to light the ways you manipulated, lied, or hurt others out of fear. It confronts you with your own hunger for control, attention, or revenge. No one wants to look there. It's easier to stay numb, it's easier to keep blaming the world, but there comes a point, usually after a heartbreak, a loss, or an inexplicable inner collapse, when you can no longer run. The mask begins to crack. The pain that you've stuffed into the back rooms of your psyche begins to spill over, and in that breakdown, a quiet voice begins to speak. Not from your mind, not from your ego, but from the deeper self, the ancient, silent core of your being. It says, "This is not the end, this is the invitation." The invitation is not to fix yourself, but to feel what has been unfelt, to sit with the version of you that never got to speak, the child who learned to be invisible, the teenager who swallowed their truth to survive, the adult who still carries every unhealed wound as if it were a map of identity. The work of shadow integration is not a project. It is not a checklist. It is a descent into the places you swore you'd never go, but it is there and only there that the gold is buried. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is the hidden architecture of suffering. The unconscious repeats itself until it is met with love, with presence, with awareness. So you begin the work, not in public, not with grand declarations, but in silence, in solitude, in moments where you choose not to abandon yourself. You notice the triggers. You track the emotional storms. You follow the threads of pain to their origin. You stop blaming the other, and you ask, what in me is crying out through this reaction? You grieve, not just for what happened to you, but for all the years you didn't know how to grieve. You forgive, not because it makes you noble, but because it unchains your own soul. And slowly, piece by piece, the exiled parts begin to return. You no longer fear your anger. You learn to listen to it. You no longer run from your sadness. You allow it to wash through you. You no longer hide your truth. You begin to speak with the voice that was buried long ago. This is what it means to begin working with the shadow. It is not about darkness for darkness's sake. It is about becoming whole. Because you are not just light. You are not just love. You are not just spirit. You are also blood and bone. You are fire and ash. You are memory and myth. You are every version of yourself that you've ever tried to escape. And when you welcome all of it, when you stop choosing between light and dark, you begin to feel something miraculous, a deep, wordless sense of peace. Not happiness, not bliss, but peace. The kind that comes from no longer being at war with yourself. The kind that whispers, you are no longer pretending. And in that moment, for the first time in perhaps a very long time, you begin to come home. Somewhere deep within you, beyond the layers of identity and performance, there lives a figure. Not one of flesh, but of presence. It waits in the stillness between breaths, watching without judgment, whispering without words. This is the inner alchemist, not a myth, not a fantasy, but a forgotten part of your own psyche, a guide born from the very pain you've tried to avoid. The inner alchemist does not scream for attention. It does not thrive in distraction. It emerges only when everything else falls apart, when the old roles no longer fit, when your voice trembles under the weight of unspoken grief, when success feels hollow, and even your prayers echo back in silence. And it is in that silence that the alchemical process begins, not as a moment of triumph, but as a collapse. Real transformation never begins with clarity. It begins with chaos, with unraveling, with the slow death of who you thought you had to be. You don't become whole by adding more layers, more affirmations, more masks. You become whole by burning away what was never yours to carry. The alchemist inside you understands this. It knows that fire is sacred, not to destroy you, but to purify. It knows that the deepest wounds are not signs of failure, but raw materials for the gold yet to be shaped. In ancient alchemy, the process began with nigredo, the blackening, the descent into darkness, a stage of confusion, loss, and emotional death. This is not a metaphor, it's a lived experience. It's the months when joy disappears, when meaning fades, when you wake up and feel like a ghost inside your own life. But this stage is not punishment, it is preparation. The soul does not evolve in the light. It evolves in the crucible of heartbreak, in the long nights of loneliness, in the quiet moments when you finally stop running and begin to feel what has waited so long to be felt. The inner alchemist invites you to enter that space, not to fix it, not to escape it, but to meet it fully. You begin to see your pain not as an obstacle, but as an oracle. Each ache becomes a map, each shadow a messenger, each trigger a signpost pointing toward the unhealed, and slowly you begin to listen differently. You stop asking, why is this happening to me, and start asking, what is this trying to awaken in me? You realize that the anger you feared for so long is actually your soul begging for boundaries. That your anxiety is not weakness, but a sign of all the truths you've silenced. That your grief is not the end, but a sacred bridge back to your most honest self. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is sacred confrontation. The alchemist within you knows that gold cannot be created without enduring the fire, but it also knows that you are not meant to remain in suffering. The fire is a passage, not a home. And so, as you continue this work, something ancient begins to stir. You start to notice beauty in places you once overlooked, the shape of a leaf, the quiet of morning light, the warmth in a stranger's eyes. You begin to soften, not in weakness, but in presence. You no longer need to defend yourself against your own feelings. You no longer need to hide behind perfection. This softening is a sign that the next stage has begun. In alchemy, this is albedo, the whitening, a phase of clarity, of emotional rebirth. You're not yet who you will become, but you're no longer who you were. You begin to reclaim what was lost, your truth, your intuition, your voice. You begin to trust the inner compass that was buried under years of noise. You begin to say no without guilt, yes without fear. You begin to create not for approval but for expression. You begin to breathe in a way that feels like coming home. The alchemist does not promise comfort. It does not promise quick results. What it offers is far more powerful, a path to authenticity, a return to wholeness, a remembering of who you were before the world taught you to forget. And so you keep walking, through ashes, through silence, through the sacred unknown, because somewhere deep within the fire you have found something no one can take from you. You have found yourself. It begins as a flicker, barely perceptible, like a breath you almost forgot to take. You feel it not in your mind but in your chest, like a tremor beneath the ribs. Something ancient is awakening, but it doesn't come with clarity or peace. It comes with tremors, with shadows stretching across the floor of your psyche, with a presence you've long denied stepping forward from the depths, and then you see it, not outside you, not in a dream, but in the mirror. For a moment, it is you, but not the you that smiles for photos, that speaks politely, that navigates daily life with practiced ease. This reflection is raw, unfiltered, eyes heavy with unshed grief, mouth slightly open, as if caught between a scream and a confession. It is the part of you you've buried beneath decades of coping, the part that never stopped waiting to be acknowledged. This is the monster, but not the kind that haunts stories. This one is yours. It is made of your disappointments. It wears the face of every time you said yes when you meant no. It carries the voice of your rage, your jealousy, your longing. It drips with the shame you swore you'd never feel again, and it does not want to hurt you. It wants to be seen. The monster in the mirror is not here to attack. It is here to return something that once belonged to you, something you left behind in the name of survival, a truth, a memory, a forgotten strength. You may want to look away. Most do. It's easier to project this monster onto others, to see the enemy in your partner, your parent, your boss, your society. But the mirror doesn't lie. The shadow is not out there. It's in you, and it's tired of being hidden. There is a moment in every inner journey when the only path forward is through the reflection. You must stop fighting the image, stop editing it, stop negotiating with it. Stand still, breathe, witness. And in that stillness, the monster softens. Its eyes, once filled with accusation, begin to show sorrow, not for what it is, but for how long it has been unloved. It doesn't roar, it doesn't demand, it simply exists, waiting for your acceptance. This is the turning point, because something breaks open in you when you stop resisting. A flood of memories, of sensations, of voices long silenced. You remember the first time you were told to hide your truth, the moment you decided your feelings were too much, the day you swallowed your voice to stay safe. The mirror doesn't just reflect a monster, it reflects the cost of abandonment, not the abandonment by others, but your abandonment of yourself. You feel the grief rise like a tide, the grief of years lost, of authenticity dimmed, of dreams traded for comfort. It comes not to drown you, but to cleanse you, because grief is not a punishment. It is proof that you are still alive, still capable of love, still connected to your soul. And then something impossible happens. You begin to feel compassion for the very parts of you once rejected. The rage that once frightened you now reveals its origin. A boundary crossed, a truth ignored. The jealousy that embarrassed you speaks of a dream unlived. The bitterness you carried is the voice of a younger self who never felt chosen. You realize the monster was never the enemy. The enemy was your disconnection from yourself. This is the essence of the alchemical mirror, not a glass to perfect your image, but a portal into your wholeness. To face the shadow is to reclaim your birthright, not the right to be flawless, but the right to be whole. Not the right to always be good, but the right to be real. Not the right to be accepted by all, but the right to stand finally in the truth of who you are. You do not need to destroy the monster. You need to become its ally. You need to hold its hand as it steps into the light. You need to say, I see you, you are mine, and you are worthy of love. And in that moment, something ancient heals, not with fanfare, not with fireworks, but with a deep, trembling breath, with a stillness that feels like forgiveness. You leave the mirror, not victorious, not defeated, but transformed, because once you've looked into the eyes of your own darkness and offered it mercy, nothing outside of you can ever own you again. It doesn't happen in a single moment. There's no grand climax, no dramatic shift where everything suddenly makes sense. The transmutation of the soul is slower than the world teaches you to expect. It's not an explosion, it's an unfolding. You begin to notice it in quiet ways. A sigh that feels different, a conversation where you don't betray yourself, a morning where the silence no longer feels like punishment, but presence. You're not healed. You're not finished. But something in you has turned. The pain that once defined you now feels like a teacher. The weight you carried begins to feel more like wisdom than burden. And when the darkness returns, as it always will, you don't run. You meet it at the door like an old companion. Not because you enjoy its company, but because you've learned what it came to show you. This is the transmutation. Not of becoming someone new, but of finally embracing who you've always been beneath the noise, the trauma, the adaptation. Not of polishing the self, but of softening into truth. You realize that wholeness was never about perfection. It was about inclusion. The parts of you that once felt unworthy are now seen as sacred. The wounded inner child, the anxious mind, the furious heart. All of them have a place at your table. You stop performing healing. You start living it. There is a depth to you now. A quiet strength that doesn't shout, doesn't need validation, doesn't crumble under rejection. You have entered the golden phase of inner alchemy, the stage where light no longer blinds, but illumines. Where love is not a transaction, but a state of being. You don't need to prove your worth anymore. You feel it in your bones. You don't need to fight to be understood. You understand yourself. You don't need to grasp for peace. You've become a vessel that holds both stillness and storm. Others may not see the change. That's not your concern. You no longer shapeshift for approval. You no longer shrink for safety. You no longer confuse attachment for love. The old wounds may still ache from time to time, but now you know how to listen. You know how to stay. You know how to hold space for yourself when the world does not. And slowly, something miraculous takes root in your life. Integrity. Not moral superiority. Not righteousness, but the alignment between your inner world and your outer life. Your yes means yes, your no means no. Your words carry the weight of your soul. You don't have to explain or justify your path to those who don't walk it. You're not here to convince, you're here to live truthfully. That is what happens when the shadow is integrated. It doesn't disappear. It becomes power. Creative power, loving power, protective power. You begin to write your story not from fear but from freedom. You look back at who you used to be, and instead of shame, you feel reverence. That version of you, afraid, lost, disconnected, was never broken. They were surviving the only way they knew how, and now they live inside you, not as wounds but as roots. The tree that you are today stands because of the storms you endured. There is a dignity in that. And as you walk forward, imperfect, evolving, human, you carry something that cannot be taken, self-possession. The world will still try to pull you out of yourself. People will still project, dismiss, misunderstand. But your foundation is no longer external. You have become your own anchor. There is nothing more powerful than a soul that has reclaimed its fragments. You are no longer a prisoner of the unconscious, no longer ruled by rejection, shame, or fear. You have faced the fire, walked through the mirror, listened to the monster, and found gold where the world told you there was only ash. This is not the end of the journey. There is no end. But now, the path is yours, truly yours, and every step you take from this place is a step walked in light, Have you ever wondered what parts of yourself you've left behind, just to be accepted by a world that never truly saw you? Have you ever felt that something in you, something sacred, fierce and tender, has been calling you home all along? Maybe now you hear it more clearly. This is the quiet revolution, not out there in the world, but deep within your being. A return to soul, a reclamation of self, a love that no longer needs to be earned, because it was always yours. You are not too much. You are not too late. You are not broken beyond repair. You are ancient soil rich with memory. You are living fire shaped by sorrow and grace. You are the alchemist and the gold. So now I ask you, not just to listen, but to feel. What part of you is ready to come home? What have you avoided that is now asking to be embraced? What truth in you is finally ready to breathe? Let this be your moment of return, to the self beneath the noise, to the voice beneath the silence, to the love that begins when you stop running. If this journey touched something in you, if you saw yourself in these words, if you felt even a spark of remembrance, then let this space be a mirror for others too. Share in the comments. What part of your shadow are you ready to embrace? Where in the world are you watching from? If this video supported your soul, consider leaving a super thanks. It helps keep this space alive and growing. Subscribe so we can keep walking this path together. And don't leave without watching the next video. Your next step may be waiting there. This is not just a video, it's an invocation to remember, to feel, to become whole. Welcome back.